In recent years, several countries around the world have faced rapid and severe declines in stability, often driven by a complex mix of economic mismanagement, political turmoil, ongoing conflicts, and environmental challenges. These nations are experiencing some of the fastest collapses in their history, with devastating impacts on their populations and future prospects. Understanding the underlying reasons behind their decline offers critical insights into the vulnerabilities that can lead to such crisis and highlights the urgent need for effective interventions and sustainable solutions. Here are 10 countries experiencing rapid deterioration. 10. Venezuela. Venezuela has undergone a catastrophic economic and political crisis over the past several years. Once a wealthy nation thanks to its vast oil reserves, Venezuela's economy has sharply declined due to falling oil prices, mismanagement by the government, and widespread corruption. Hyperinflation has spiraled out of control, reaching levels where the local currency, the bolivar, has become virtually worthless, eroding the savings of millions of Venezuelans and making everyday goods unaffordable. The government's authoritarian tendencies, including the suppression of opposition and disputed elections, have further deepened political instability. As a result, the country faces a humanitarian crisis characterized by shortages of food, medicine, and basic necessities, forcing over 7 million people to flee in search of safety and stability elsewhere. Infrastructure has decayed, public services have collapsed, and crime rates have soared, all contributing to the country's rapid decline. 9. Lebanon. Lebanon is another nation on the brink of complete collapse. Years of political corruption, sectarian divisions, and economic mismanagement have eroded public trust and destabilized the country's financial system. The banking sector, once a regional hub for finance, has crumbled under restrictions that limit depositors' access to their savings, leading to widespread hardship. The Lebanese pound has lost over 90% of its value, plunging the population into poverty. The situation worsened after the devastating explosion at the Beirut port in 2020, which destroyed key infrastructure and exacerbated shortages of fuel, medicine, and food. Political protests have become a regular feature, with citizens demanding accountability and reforms. The combination of economic collapse, political paralysis, and external shocks has left Lebanon struggling to maintain basic public services, pushing it toward a state of crisis. 8. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has experienced a severe economic crisis driven by years of mismanagement, debt accumulation, and policy failures. Heavy borrowing to fund infrastructure projects, combined with a decline in tourism and exports like tea, have drained the country's foreign reserves. In 2022, shortages of fuel, cooking gas, medicine, and food sparked mass protests and demands for government resignations. The government's decision to implement tax cuts and other policies without sustainable planning further deepened the financial crisis, leading to default on external debt obligations. The resulting economic paralysis has caused widespread hardship, unemployment, and social unrest. The crisis has revealed the fragility of Sri Lanka's economy, highlighting how poor governance and external shocks can rapidly destabilize a nation. 7. Sudan. Sudan's ongoing collapse is rooted in its complex history of civil conflict, political upheaval, and economic decline. Since the ousting of Omar al-Bashir in 2019, the country has faced persistent challenges in establishing stable governance. Multiple armed conflicts, particularly in Darfur and other regions, have displaced millions, while ongoing political transitions have struggled to bring unity. Economically, Sudan has suffered from the loss of oil revenue following South Sudan's independence, compounded by international sanctions and internal corruption. Inflation has skyrocketed, and basic services like healthcare and education are underfunded or inaccessible. The fragile peace agreements have yet to fully stabilize the country, and social unrest remains common as the population grapples with poverty, displacement, and uncertainty about the future. 6. Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe's long-standing economic difficulties continue to deepen, driven by hyperinflation, currency devaluation, and political repression. The government's policies, including controversial land reforms and economic mismanagement, have led to a collapse of productivity and investor confidence. Hyperinflation has eroded savings and rendered the local currency virtually worthless, plunging millions into poverty. Political repression under the ruling ZANU-PF party has stifled dissent and hindered economic reforms, further discouraging investment. Infrastructure and public services have deteriorated, and unemployment remains high. The country's economic decline has driven a significant emigration wave, with many Zimbabweans seeking better opportunities abroad, leaving behind a struggling society facing persistent hardship. 5. Haiti. Haiti is embroiled in one of the world's most severe humanitarian crises, driven by political instability, violence, and natural disasters. The country's weak governance, pervasive corruption, and lack of effective institutions have hindered efforts to stabilize the nation. Widespread gang violence and criminal activity threaten daily life, impede humanitarian aid delivery, and undermine state authority. Natural disasters such as hurricanes and earthquakes frequently devastate the fragile infrastructure, destroying homes, crops, and essential services. Food insecurity, cholera outbreaks, and internal displacement are chronic issues faced by millions. The combination of political chaos, environmental vulnerability, and economic hardship has left Haiti unable to provide basic needs for its citizens, pushing it further toward collapse. 4. Yemen. Yemen's ongoing civil war has precipitated one of the worst humanitarian crises in recent history. The conflict involves multiple factions, including the Houthi rebels and the internationally recognized government, backed by regional powers such as Saudi Arabia and Iran. The war has led to widespread destruction of infrastructure, mass displacement, and a humanitarian disaster, with millions suffering from famine, disease, and lack of access to healthcare. A blockade imposed by coalition forces has restricted the flow of goods, worsening shortages of food, fuel, and medicine. The economy has all but collapsed, with the country's currency losing value rapidly, and most of the population living in extreme poverty. Yemen's ongoing crisis exemplifies how conflict and external interventions can dismantle a nation's social fabric and economic stability. 3. Nicaragua. Nicaragua's political landscape has sharply deteriorated under President Daniel Ortega's increasingly authoritarian rule. Protests against government corruption and repression in 2018 were met with violent crackdowns, and subsequent measures have further consolidated power. The government has silenced opposition, restricted media freedom, and jailed political opponents, creating a climate of fear. Economically, sanctions and international isolation have hurt the country's growth prospects, leading to declining foreign investment and economic contraction. The populace faces rising poverty, unemployment, and limited access to basic services. The political repression and economic decline have created a volatile environment, with social unrest mounting as citizens demand democratic reforms and better living conditions. 2. Afghanistan. Afghanistan's situation deteriorated dramatically after the Taliban regained control in 2021. The country's government collapsed, and international aid and assets were frozen, triggering a severe economic crisis. Basic services such as healthcare, education, and food supply chains have broken down, leaving millions of Afghans in dire need. The economy has collapsed, with widespread unemployment and food shortages, and the international community faces the challenge of addressing the resulting humanitarian catastrophe. Human rights abuses and restrictions on women and minorities have intensified under Taliban rule, further destabilizing the country. Afghanistan's ongoing crisis underscores how political upheaval, economic isolation, and conflict can push a nation toward collapse. And finally, 1. Madagascar. Madagascar grapples with political instability and environmental challenges that threaten its stability. Frequent leadership changes and political crises have hindered consistent governance, discouraging investment and development efforts. The economy, heavily reliant on agriculture, particularly vanilla exports, faces threats from environmental degradation, including deforestation and climate change. These environmental issues threaten food security and economic sustainability for the rural population. Social unrest and poverty are widespread, with many Malagasy people living in conditions of extreme hardship. The combination of political fragility, environmental degradation, and economic dependence on vulnerable sectors has pushed Madagascar toward instability and potential collapse. These countries are experiencing rapid deterioration primarily due to a mix of internal governance failures, conflicts, economic mismanagement, and external pressures. The effects include widespread poverty, displacement, social unrest, and a breakdown of essential services. The situation remains highly fluid, and ongoing developments could alter these rankings over time. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Travel Trooper for more stories like this and drop a like, share and comment your thoughts below.